we can see that Putin's army is now starting to target civilians. It may be an act of military desperation, but I think by all accounts, this amounts to a war crime. These are targeting civilians, killing women and children, targeting housing. This is not acceptable by any standard. And of course, eventually, Putin will have to answer for the crimes he is currently committing.
Yeah, that will all play out, but let's concentrate on what's happening right now. You've seen the aerial attacks in Ukraine. Today, the Ukrainian president reiterated his call for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. You may have seen journalists asking the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, about that, and he said no NATO member countries are considering this as an option. Why not? Ukraine is under attack from on air, and as you said, civilians are being targeted.
Well, we have to remember that just in the past few days, there have been massive shifts in policy throughout Europe. Last Thursday, for many, it was not imaginable that Germany would actually provide arms or let other countries re-export their arms. They now are supplying arms themselves and are going to be increasing their defense spending to 2% of GDP. In the beginning, it was just the Baltics, Poland, a few other countries, of course, the UK, the US, that were supplying arms to Ukraine. Now we are being joined by more and more countries. This is a very positive sign. The Ukrainians are fighting for our values, the values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And Putin is fighting to recreate an empire, to subjugate a neighboring country, and to stamp out democracy and the rule of law. So it is, by all means, a justified fight of defense, and we in the West, in democratic countries, have a great responsibility to help them in any and all ways that we can. So financial help has been flowing for many, many quarters, including the entire European Union. Of course, many member states, in addition to that, countries outside of the European Union. Military aid is also extremely important. What we can see that the Ukrainian defenders are courageous, I think, does not even come close to describing what they are doing. But they are defending their country. They're defending all of our values, and it shows also, I think, the desperation of the Russian army, of Putin's army, that it has to resort to such brutal targeting of civilians.
Yes, as you said, it's brutal. The Ukrainians are courageous, and they have our admiration. But they do need more than that. You talk about policy changes from countries, from the EU, from NATO as a collective. Do you see there being a policy shift on a no-fly zone? Would you support that? Because we are seeing residential buildings, orphanages, hospitals being targeted. Do you support a shift in policy?
The question is how far things will get. So I think there is a certain hesitancy on behalf of many countries to have an open NATO-Russia conflict. We currently do not have an open NATO-Russia conflict. We have many countries, among them many NATO member states, providing arms, providing all kinds of support to the Ukrainian army.
So does Russia have to reach NATO borders for there to be a no-fly zone? Because as President Zelensky points out, that will be too late. If Ukraine falls, Russia is on NATO member countries' border. A no-fly zone has to come into force before then, doesn't it?
Well, Russia already is on NATO country borders. So Russia is on the border of my country, on the border of Estonia, on the border of Lithuania, on the border of Poland already today. This is unprecedented territory where we currently are. The important thing is that we in Western democracies, both in the EU and in NATO, work and stick together. And right now we have a fantastic, fantastic cooperation. There are decisions being taken which were unthinkable even a week ago. We have to see how things develop, but the important thing here is to continue sticking together, because Putin has been trying to drive a wedge between us, between democratic countries. That is part of his strategy all along. He has gotten actually the exact opposite. He has gotten a coming together of countries ever firmer, ever firmer, ever firmer. If we look at the economic sanctions which have been adopted, these are extremely, and they will be extremely devastating to the Russian economy, cutting off the Russian central bank from funding means effectively taking out most of Putin's foreign cash reserves. So that government is not going to have the money to pay for its social services, to pay for wages, to pay for everything eventually. Already now we're seeing in Moscow and other cities runs on the banks. We're seeing a huge spike in the cost of the ruble. The stock exchange has been closed. There already are great difficulties.
There is significant impact, but that will take a while to take effect, if you like, because the idea being that those close to Putin need to feel that, the Russian people need to feel that, and that all takes time. And as you quite rightly pointed out, Russia is on your border, on Latvia's border, and we have heard experts warn that, look, if Russia takes Ukraine, you are vulnerable. Countries like Latvia are vulnerable because he'll come for you next.
Putin is not only fighting against Ukraine, Putin is fighting against democracy. And in that sense, he's fighting against all of our democracies. He does not believe in the idea of a nation state or the right of self-determination. He has said as much explicitly in the case of Ukraine. He wants to recreate an empire. So an attack on Ukraine essentially is an attack on democracy as such. So of course, I think all of us are in for a long and a very difficult road. This is the beginning of that, and it's the complete confrontation of Putin with the West. What we are in the process of doing, and I think it's correct, is a complete isolation of Putin's regime. And these are not to be underestimated, the various sanctions. They are biting already. The various seizures of property of the various tycoons closely affiliated with Russia. We see already inside Russian television hosts being aghast at how can their Italian villa be taken from them. Well, the fact is it has been taken from them and more will be taken. And this is what we have to understand. It is Putin's attack on Western democracy. We have to stay strong, stay united here. And we're also doing the right thing within NATO. We are reinforcing all of the eastern flank from the Baltic down to the Black Sea. There are more NATO forces in the Baltic countries, also in my country, than there were just 2 weeks ago. There's more soldiers, there's more military hardware, technology. So this buildup on our soil will continue. We just made a decision over the upcoming 3 years to further increase our spending on defense up to 2.5%. We're over 2.2 by 2.3%. We'll be upping the ante there. So we're not just a consumer of security. We are also paying ourselves. And many countries are doing this actually throughout NATO. So we are becoming a true force also at an individual country level. And remember, the European Union has now taken a decision to collectively fund arms for Ukraine. This has never been before. So even the EU is coming onto the global stage, not only as an economic, but also ever more growing as a military power. So we have incredible strength on our side. The economy of the West is incomparably larger than Russia's. The combined military strength makes Russia's military seem actually rather quite small. So we needn't be afraid of our own power. We have to build on that power, because in order to speak with Putin, Putin only understands the language of power. So more strength, more investment, more support for Ukraine is the way to get Putin to start to consider things differently.
Yeah, I think it was the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson who pointed out earlier today, if Putin hoped that NATO would get smaller, it's actually only getting bigger and stronger. Prime Minister, while I have you, one final question, if I may, and this is about the refugee crisis that will undoubtedly be created. It started as a result of what is happening in Ukraine. What is Latvia doing to help those who want to cross the border from Ukraine into your country?
Right. Well, we don't have a direct land border. Those refugees are primarily coming from Poland, Lithuania into Latvia. We have, of course, our Interior Ministry has an entire system set up to accept refugees. But what we're seeing is a fantastic groundswell of volunteer support. So we have local communities, individuals already taking Ukrainians into their homes, into their families, feeding them, helping them. We're adapting our laws so these people would legally have a right to work, bringing them into the healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera. So from the government side, and especially from the private individual side, we're seeing an outpouring of support. And actually, the only difficulty that we have is that we have so many people wanting to help that we're having difficulty making sure everyone has something to do. So there is a tremendous groundswell of support for Ukraine. People, companies are donating funds, so money is going to the Ukrainian government, to them, to keep up the war effort and the economy as such. We're continuing sending humanitarian supplies, military supplies, fuel, medicines, everything. There's tremendous support in our country, and we also will continue in this vein, closely coordinating with our neighbors, with our friends in the European Union, and with our allies in NATO.